Hi, it's Louise at Spiral Bright Insight. I am doing it might not be so quick, but certainly an energy check-in just to share some insight that is coming through sort of over the last few days, and particularly today with it being the full moon in Gemini. Some other energies that have stepped forward that I wasn't aware of previously, and also some insight into what is likely to be coming up in the coming days, because we are stepping into, or certainly in a week of very, very powerful and very high frequency energy as well. So I'm going to share what I have sort of been thinking about, been reflecting on. And if you're new to my channel, my name's Louise Platt. I'm a galactic and an intuitive astrologer. So I try and really bring in insight and my perspective on a lot of the key astrological alignments and transits. So I bring in the fixed stars and cosmic energies when I feel, they have something to share, when they have a message for us. But I've also been working with the gene keys and generally just insight that comes through that wants to be shared. If you are new to my channel, please do check out my website, because I do offer readings and various different types of astrology and readings and energy work. And I also have a mailing list, so please do sign up for that if you are interested in hearing from me, just with a heads up each month as to what is coming up for us. So we are in we're in a very, very, very powerful corridor, I'm going to call it. It feels as if it started on the 12th of December, the 12/12 portal, and is probably, or like from where I'm sort of viewing things, I feel it is going to lead us up to Solstice on the 21st of December. So very, very powerful period of time. We had the 12/12 sort of kicking the energies off, followed by Friday the 13th, day of the goddess, followed by the full moon in Gemini earlier on today. And then tomorrow, actually later on this evening for us in the UK, Mercury is going to station direct. And then we have a number of other quite powerful astrological alignments coming up in the lead up to solstice, which in itself is a very, very interesting chart. And to do it justice, I'm going to do a separate video about some of the energies that I see in that chart. So just to, first of all, a quick sort of heads up, or well, a quick nod to the fact that we did have Friday the 13th. Now, I have always considered the 13th to be a lucky number. I was born on the 13th. But certainly, tradition and superstition, etc., will have us believe that Friday the 13th is an unlucky day, that it is a day to be feared, that it is a day in which everything is going to go wrong. And of course, with this particular Friday the 13th, we had Mercury in retrograde in Sagittarius. So again, that sort of gives even more of a reason why perhaps things wouldn't go to plan. But the truth is, or my truth is, that the 13th, Friday the 13th, is the day of the goddess. Obviously, Friday is Venus Day, and the 13th is the number of the divine feminine. It's also a number that I associate with Christ consciousness. It takes us from the order of the 12 and adds an extra branch. This is really acting as a bridge to something else. The number 13 can be seen as a disruptive influence, here to disrupt the status quo, but in order to help us transform, in order to help us take that step across the bridge into a higher way of being, a higher way of seeing the world, and a higher state of consciousness. So this is very much linked to spiritual awakening and the ascension. But it also helps us to really connect with the divine feminine part of ourselves. And we all have the divine feminine within us, regardless of our gender. So this is the energy that is very soft, it's very yielding, it takes us into a state of acceptance, of intuition, of presence. It helps us connect to our empathic gifts, to feel more compassion, to be fluid, to receive, and to be introspective. This is the energy of grace, of unconditional love, of fluidity, of the heart center, of allowing, of accepting things the way they are rather than trying to force anything. It really helps us to step into our feeling center rather than being in the head all the time. Not that there is anything wrong with being in the head, for sure. And with the full moon in Gemini, so much has come up that has really been activating the head, activating the thoughts and the stories and the ideas that are literally flying through. So in addition to the 12/12 portal, Friday the 13th, Saturday the 14th was the day in which we moved into the Gene Key 11 or Gate 11 in human design. So that in itself is really fascinating because Gene Key 11 takes us from the shadow of obscurity through the gift of idealism into the city of light. And I don't know about any of you watching this, but for me, Friday the 13th triggered an absolute barrage of what I see now is shadow, is parts of me that were trying to attract my attention to come back in, because that is ultimately what our shadow is. Our shadow is or represents the parts of us that we have either turned our back on, that we've buried away, that we've hidden, that we may have given away to someone else, but they are parts of us that we may feel ashamed of or scared of or feel fearful of, parts of us that we have cut off, cut out, but literally just turned the light down so that we can't or that we don't have to see them. They remain in the shadow where, it's quite easy to ignore them and disassociate and separate ourselves from them. But the fact is they are always there because we as souls are completely whole in ourselves. And it is my belief that we've come in with certain aspects or elements of ourselves that perhaps we have disconnected, that we have lost, that we have rejected, that we have separated from, and we are ultimately trying to find ways to bring those parts back into us, because we are always whole, but we may not always feel whole, because part of our growth is to explore those parts that we may feel are missing or that have been taken from us. And what is coming up very strongly, certainly for me, and I imagine I'm not the only person, is that with the full moon in Gemini, I think I talked about the fact that for me, Gemini is all about strands and lots of different strands. And what I have been working with over the last 2 days is having a light shone very brightly and very loudly on some of the strands that perhaps I haven't quite haven't connected to, or strands that may have been separated or disconnected or siphoned off into another direction, which I don't necessarily feel I'm completely in control of. And what the full moon will always shine a light on the work that we have to do. The moon in opposition to the sun wants us to be complete, wants us to step into the wholeness of who we are. And in this particular full moon, it's very much about showing us where perhaps we are not full, where we are not whole, where we do lack a sense of completeness. And I said in my full moon video about the full moon in Gemini was that there was likely to be a lot of noise, a lot of stories, a lot of ideas, a lot of words, a lot of thoughts, lots of head activity. I also read something which I thought was really interesting. It's from Jenny Schiltz, and she described this full moon as a cosmic washing machine, which is really designed at an energetic level to put us in a spin, to literally agitate everything, to move everything around, to stretch it, to pull it, to shake it, to zhuzh it, to zhuzh us, so that we can literally allow all the bits that perhaps may have been hidden or may have been too attached so that we couldn't see them to rise to the surface. So it is very much a cleansing process, but it is through agitation, and it is through really shaking things up and scattering things left, right, and center, which of course is another theme of Gemini, which is very scattered. It's mutable air, so things are constantly changing. And it is helping us to, so the process of this cosmic washing machine is helping us to really see where we may have a distorted sense of reality, ultimately helping us to see all the ways in which we have ultimately chosen to or pretended to be connected from ourselves, from our higher self, from source, from Gaia, from that sort of sense of belonging. It is helping us to see what perhaps has been hidden in the shadows that we weren't aware of necessarily before, in order that we can step into much more clarity. And of course, when Mercury is stationed at the moment, when Mercury starts to move direct again, as of later today, this clarity should start to come back again. We've had this opportunity while Mercury has been retrograde in Sagittarius to really go within and to connect with our deep inner wisdom. And now we're going to have a chance to really start to work with what it is that we have learned, and to have this full moon, during that time, to have Friday the 13th, to have the 12/12, along with lots of other really powerful alignments that had over this Mercury retrograde period. All of it is playing a role to really help us to see much more clearly where we have been disconnected, because ultimately Gemini wants us to connect. This is the sign of communication. This is the sign of networking. This is when we come together and we share our ideas, we use our voice, but it is very much about connection. So the full moon has really been helping us to see where we might have come out of alignment with that connection. And if I just come back to the gene key 11, the shadow of obscurity really is, we are unable to see things as they truly are, where we are in the shadows, where we are in the depth. And this is about, getting lost in a belief system that perhaps feels more comfortable to be attached to, but is very far from the truth. It really, when we're working with this shadow of obscurity, it asks us to really look at what is fake and what is genuine, what is true, what is false, and where perhaps have you become a slave to or trapped in a belief that isn't actually based in truth. Where have you given away your own light or given away your power to something or someone else in order that you maintain this state of disconnection from all that you truly are? Because again, what is really coming to light for me, and this has been a recurring lesson, so this is definitely a repeating pattern for me, is that, we can believe that someone else has taken something from us, or someone has taken our power away, or someone has taken our light, and somehow we are the victims of theft or betrayal, however we perceive it. But actually, we have control over everything, even if we don't believe we do, or it doesn't seem that we do. So if something is missing, it's because we have allowed that to become missing. We have allowed it to be given away. We have allowed it to remain in the shadow, so that we are not fully engaged, we're not fully attached, we're not fully connected to it. Now, this is also when we step into the gift of Gene Key 11, idealism. This is about feeling and knowing the truth rather than necessarily believing it, because it is possible when we are talking about beliefs and ideas to get it wrong, to be influenced take on other people's ideas of what is truth. So this is about where we may have a skewed understanding of reality, where we may be a victim to our beliefs which aren't necessarily true, and also where it is very easy to get lost in thoughts, in that mental loop, in all these ideas, all these voices in your head, that it's very easy just to go along with a story and actually get caught up in that energy very, very quickly. But as you remain sort of stuck in that net of ideas and that headspace, that mental center, that head center, you are effectively becoming distanced from the light and from the truth. And the truth is ultimately is your light. It is you. It is who you are at your core. So as we move through this gene key into the siddhi, which ultimately is light, we are effectively working to shine a light on everything, to remove the shadow, because the shadow is only part of ourselves that, as I said, has become disconnected or has been hidden away, that you haven't wanted to, or you haven't chosen to give light to that particular aspect or that part of yourself, and there will be a valid reason from a soul perspective on why you've chosen to do that. But this is an opportunity to really see where that might have been the case, where that might be happening. And, if you're ready and if you make that choice, which again is very much the Gemini energy, you have this choice and this opportunity to just pull those strands back, to pull that shadow into the light so that you can integrate it, so it can become whole and part of you again. So you no longer feel as if anything is missing, so that you no longer have to sort of rely on your head and your thoughts and all those ideas and stories to sort of tell you the version of a story. You actually know deep within yourself, within your being, what is your truth and what is not. And ultimately, this is about coming back into the heart space and trusting the self with absolute totality, and removing all sense of self-doubt in that process. And as we do that, with this beautiful light of the full moon in Gemini, we can step into a much more lightness of being. Gemini is very playful. It is very light. It's mutable. It is, yes, scattered, but also, we are being encouraged to let go and release anything that feels heavy, that has been weighing us down. Letting go of what feels heavy, and we're also starting to see where we may have missing pieces or missing strands or missing fragments of the self that are really ready to come back. And you'll know when they're ready to come back because your attention will be drawn to the fact that they are missing. Now, the mind in typical Gemini can create all sorts of stories around what may have happened, why this may be the case. A lot of the time it's the ego trying to justify, but also, unless we had a story or an idea or a thought, we wouldn't necessarily notice. So it is about seeing all these stories as something really positive and really helpful, but also being willing to actually stop and ask, why are these stories coming up? What is it that I need to learn from this? Because the mind will try and make sense of things, and the mind will try and come up with a rationale for perhaps why something may be hidden in the shadow. And again, some of the stories can be really quite incredible. And it's very easy to get to go down those threads and get carried away. But it's about kind of going down there to see what's at the end of those strands and those threads, seeing that perhaps it is part of the shadow, and being able to bring that back into the full light. And obviously with the full moon at this time, this is exactly what we are meant to do. So this is about really anchoring in all of those strands, all of those missing parts of the self into the self, so that we can connect with the wholeness of the self, the wholeness of you, the wholeness of me. And what I really love is the fact that the next full moon, so we've now got 28 days where we'll be working up to the full moon in Cancer. And with the Cancer energy, this is about finding the home within the self, because ultimately that is where our home is. And so much of this life is about distracting us from that, trying to get us to seek our wisdom, our gurus, our fix, our healing outside of the self, but ultimately it always comes back to the self and to the wholeness. And if you have given your power away, or you have lost a part of you, or if you have rejected or tried to ignore a part of you, then those parts are always going to be calling back to you. However they choose to attract your attention obviously is going to be different depending on who you are and what your soul journey is. But my experience is that often we won't pay attention until something becomes quite irritating or annoying or painful, and that can be emotional pain, and it can also be physical pain. Emotional disease and physical disease, or disease. So, there are lots of ways in which our shadow tries to call itself back to us. And this has been a really, really big learning for me all year. And with the full moon in Gemini, the last full moon of 2024, I've had another opportunity to really explore that and try and, just kind of access another level of understanding in order to, so that I can start to bring part of those shadowy aspects back into me. Now, what will be beautiful, and I will obviously talk about the full moon in Cancer when it comes round, but by that time, Mars will have retrograded into Cancer as well. And Mars is very close to the full moon in the next chart. So that, again, is really helping us to connect with who we are at our core level. Now, we also have this week the nodes on the nodal axis, Aries and Libra, are going to move to 2 degrees of the respective signs on this axis, which means that the south node is going to meet with the supergalactic center. Now, I have talked about this particular transit in another video. It feels really, really important, but again, it feels like it's another sort of part of the chart and part of the astrology that is really encouraging us to let go, with the south node coming in here and connecting with the supergalactic center. It's really encouraging us to let go of all those false agreements and attachments to anything that has really been trying to distract ourselves from ourselves, that has been trying to separate us from ourselves, where we've been looking outside of the self, through other people, through other situations, to find our truth. The supergalactic center really is so powerful, stretches so far beyond the self, to really show us that ultimately what we are trying to find and what we are seeking lies absolutely inside of us. And as well, at the same time as it is stretching us into the void to explore all that is possible, it is also really trying to pull us back, tugging on our consciousness to bring us back to source, and to come back home to connect with the biggest light and the biggest power source of all, which is our own soul, which lies within us. So this is about letting go of all of those external influences, anything interfering, any noise, anything outside of the self that has been distracting us from coming home to the self. And obviously with the north node in Aries, this is about coming into all of the self and to really claiming that sort of sovereignty and that ownership of who you are. It doesn't mean that you have to lose all your relationships. It doesn't mean that, that we're not going to, rely on other people or be guided and supported by other people. But it is about making sure that ultimately you know who you are at your core, and that all of the parts that perhaps have been distracting you from that, that have felt as if they might be missing, that they are coming back into alignment so that you can step into the fullness of who you are. This is about anchoring into the self. As we move through this, this period of time between the 12/12 and the solstice, on Wednesday, we have the sun is going to meet the galactic center. So this is a very powerful activation point. We have access to a much higher level of wisdom, higher consciousness, light codes, light activations are flooding in for sure, just helping us to rise up above. We've had By this point, we will have had Friday the 13th, which may have been disrupted, but certainly helping us access the more divine feminine count part of ourselves. We've had we've been working with Gene Key 11, moving from obscurity to light. We've had the full moon in Gemini, shining a light on all the parts that we may have been disconnected or separated from parts of ourselves. We've then had Mercury station direct, sort of ready to bring in all the wisdom that we have sort of had and accessed through the retrograde period. Then we have the sun moving and really shining a light on the galactic center, activating that cosmic point. The same day, obviously, the sun will be in square to Neptune, so helping us or really forcing us to consider the higher perspective, the more spiritual side of the more spiritual aspect of ourselves. Stepping beyond what may have kept us fixed and held in one reality into something that is going to be entirely new. And on the same day, we also have Jupiter in retrograde in Gemini opposing the Great Attractor. So again, the Great Attractor is one of the very powerful cosmic points. This one is more about truth and also having the ability to see the unseen, to having that psychic those psychic gifts activated, that foresight, being able to see behind things. And Jupiter is really sort of expanding that through the opposition, but also helping us to see what is hidden within the self. So again, this is this incredible time where there's just so much information, so much wisdom, so much light coming in, but ultimately it feels as if it is designed to help us know ourselves more. Now I'm going to do a separate video about the solstice because, as I said, that chart is really powerful. The moon is actually opposing Saturn in that chart at 13 degrees, so again you've got that disruptor sort of divine feminine energy coming in again. But what's really beautiful is throughout the week we have got the kite pattern in the sky, and the kite and the base of the kite, the tail of the kite is activating the south node in Libra, with the tip is at Neptune and the north node. Neptune at 27 degrees of Pisces, 4 degrees away from the north node in Aries. And then the two supporting acts or supporting energies in this kite are Pluto and Uranus, and we've talked about that grand minor triangle before, but this is very much about using the energy of Pluto now in Aquarius to transform, to uncover, and with Uranus again very disruptive, sort of breaking through that which has become fixed, really helping us to awaken, to see our value, both sort of pointing at Neptune and now the north node as they become much closer, and obviously they're going to meet exactly in Pisces in early 2025. But this is about sort of stepping into a new version of the self, a new sense of sovereignty, and with a new strong sense of direction, breaking new grounds with the north node in Aries, but on taking a much more spiritual path, stepping into a higher degree of compassion, letting go of all that has held us down and kept us fixed in certain ways of being, and really seeing that this whole process as a bridge to a much higher version of the self. And I will be talking about the energies of the nodes changing, the nodal axis changing in a separate video. There is just so much to share at the moment. So, as I think I say this most of the time, I feel I've only really scratched the surface because there are so many other alignments in the chart over the next week. But ultimately, we are in this time when it does feel as if we are riding waves of light, of ideas, of beliefs, of new consciousness coming in. But ultimately it is too, and this is really, I know this is a message for me as well, more so than probably anyone else, but it is about being able to see where we have become separated from ourselves and seeing those parts of ourselves in that perhaps we didn't even realize we're missing, but suddenly seeing them and realizing that actually they need to come back in and they need to be welcomed in, even if it is parts of the self that you or I don't feel comfortable bringing back in. Because ultimately, when we're doing shadow work and we're shining a light on those parts of the self, it is not always comfortable, and it is not always something that necessarily you want to do. Often these parts are in the shadows for a reason, but it is the time when we bring it all back in, because we need to really step up and step into ourselves. So I'm going to leave it there. I will be back soon. I've got lots more content to share. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think. It's always really good for other people to read the comments as well. I think, because it often shows that we are all on a similar path and there's similar things coming up. So please do share how things are for you, how you found this full moon in particular. And yeah, let's have an amazing week and try and keep your feet on the ground, I think is the general message, because I've got a feeling it might be quite hard to do so. But it's all part of the process. So sending lots of love, and I'll be back soon.